Hey guys, it's me and welcome back to another video. So Thor, The Dark World is of course the sequel to Thor, Ragnarok, and it's also part 6 in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It was released in 2013 and was directed by Alan Taylor, who previously worked on Game of Thrones and Mad Max Fury Road. But in my opinion, he did not do as good of a job with Thor, The Dark World as he did with those other projects. And honestly, that's an understatement. First of all, this movie made about $644 million worldwide against a $170 million budget, which makes it a financial success. However, critics didn't really like it. It has a 66% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes with an average rating of 59, so it's kind of a toss-up. Fans seem to like it a bit more though, with a 78% audience score. This movie starts off right where Thor, Ragnarok left off, with Thor being banished from Asgard and having to live out the remainder of his days on Earth. He ends up crashing in London near a pub called the King's Head, and he goes inside and orders a beer. While he's sitting there drinking his beer, he hears a woman scream, and then he sees that a bunch of thugs are beating up some guy. And so Thor steps in and single-handedly defeats all of them. Afterwards, the owner of the pub, who turns out to be a frost giant, tells Thor that he must leave because he doesn't want him causing trouble in his pub. Later that night, we see Jane Foster in her apartment, and she's hooked up to some kind of ether thing that's glowing brightly. Sif and the Warriors 3 show up and tell her that they've come to take Thor home to Asgard. She tells them that he's not here, but they can go ahead and check his apartment anyway, except when they get over there, it's empty. They also notice that the ether is missing, which apparently belonged to Malekith, the Dark Elf. Back at the pub, we see that Thor has fallen asleep behind the bar and he dreams about his past with Jane. He wakes up and decides that he wants to find Jane and return the ether to her. Meanwhile, Sif is looking for Thor in a phone book and she finds his name listed under Dr. Donald Blake. She shows up at his apartment and sees that he's left a note saying that he's gone to find a cure for the ether. Then suddenly Malekith and his army of dark elves attack. She barely escapes with her life and then runs into Heimdall, who says he'll help her stop Malekith if she helps him defeat the Dark Elves first. They end up teaming up and teleporting to London, where they're greeted by Darcy, who just so happens to be Jane's assistant. And I guess Darcy is now an official part of the MCU, even though she only appeared in the first Thor movie. Anyway, they go to Jane's apartment, but Malekith beats them there and steals the ether. He then disappears with his army, leaving the rest of them defeated. Heimdall tells Sif that he will open a portal to Asgard so that they can regroup. Then we see that Loki has taken over the throne and is now ruling over Asgard. And Thor shows up, interrupting one of his evil speeches. Loki pretends to be happy to see his brother, but underneath it all he's still bitter about being banished to Earth and sentenced to live as a mortal. Thor thinks that he deserves a chance at redemption, but Odin disagrees. Thor argues back and says that their father would have done things differently. And so Odin just banishes Thor from Asgard again. He also strips him of his powers, although he'll eventually get them back later on in the movie. On Earth, Malekith is causing mass destruction and basically spreading darkness across the entire planet, and Jane is slowly turning into a dark elf herself because she's been infected by the ether. Darcy finds Thor passed out on the street and he wakes up and reveals his true identity. She doesn't really seem surprised or scared, but she does agree to help him. And together they go to visit Erik Selvig, who's now working at a university instead of being director of SHIELD. Like in the comics, Thor takes him to a lake and asks him to make him a new helmet. He refuses at first, but eventually agrees after Thor promises to return his old helmet. Meanwhile, Malekith is giving a speech about how he will now plunge the entire universe into darkness. Thor arrives and interrupts him. They fight for a bit, but Thor gets tired of it quickly and punches Malekith super hard, sending him flying backwards. Malekith uses his dark magic to escape, and then Thor grabs onto his ship and pursues him. Back on Earth, Darcy is trying to figure out what to do about the ether, which is now infecting Jane even more. Suddenly, Erik shows up with Thor's new helmet and gives it to him. And while he's putting it on, Malekith appears behind him and tries to stab him with his dagger. But before he can do anything, Thor blasts him with lightning and then flies away on his new badass space horse. I'm actually not joking. His name is Tooth Gnasher and he's totally awesome. After riding through some portals, Thor ends up in Svartalfheim, which is the Dark Elves' homeworld. He teams up with some friendly elves and together they march on Malekith's army. Thor is captured soon afterwards. But luckily, Sif shows up to save him. They team up and continue fighting Malekith's forces. Eventually, they reach the main chamber and confront Malekith once and for all. He casts a spell that covers the entire room in darkness, which prevents Thor from using his eyesight to locate him. Instead, Thor has to use his other senses to find him, which isn't easy because everything's dark and it's hard to see. But eventually he finds Malekith, throws him to the ground, and then pulls his dagger out of its sheath. Malekith asks him if he's going to kill him, and Thor responds by saying that he has bigger plans for him. Afterwards, we see that Odin has had a change of heart and decides to let Thor back into Asgard. The citizens cheer when he returns and everyone's happy. Jane is also cured of the ether and she and Thor share a kiss. Loki shows up and says that they should probably be celebrating, but no one pays any attention to him. Instead, they all go to a party. In a post-credit scene, we see that Thanos has retrieved the ether from Thor, and it's now fused with the Reality Stone. Later on, it'll become the Power Stone and be placed inside the Infinity Gauntlet. Overall, I'd give this movie a 4 out of 10. I thought it was pretty bad. I mean, don't get me wrong, there were some good parts to it, especially when Thor was pretending to be a human living in London. That was hilarious, and it's the same kind of comedy that we saw in Thor Ragnarok. But unfortunately, the movie wasn't funny enough. It tried way too hard to be dark and serious. And as I said earlier, the CGI was also pretty weak compared to the other movies. There were also quite a few plot holes. For example, why did Odin banish Thor? I mean, sure, he wanted to protect him from Malekith, but couldn't he have just given him more training instead? Thor was literally not even a year older in this movie than he was in the first Thor film. Also, why was Jane infected by the ether in the first place? If it was so dangerous, then why didn't she just get rid of it or return it to the Dark Elves? Another thing that confused me was the whole love story between Jane and Thor. I'm not gonna lie, but I never really shipped them. I know that people like their relationship, but I personally think that it was pretty one-sided. Jane always felt like a normal human being, and Thor was obviously much more powerful. There was also a big age gap between them. I mean, Thor was like 1,500 years old, and Jane was a 20-something-year-old. Now, I'm not the kind of person who judges fictional relationships and ships, but I do have to say that I think the age gap in this one was a little weird. If you disagree with my opinion, then feel free to comment it down below. I always enjoy reading your thoughts. But anyways, that's gonna do it for this review. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, have a great day.